And we're live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to NS Design's second Connect Live event featuring NS Design electric violinist, artist, and educator Scott Laird. Scott is a music instructor and fine arts chair of the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics. And additionally, Scott is a frequent presenter and clinician for ASTA, the American String Teachers Association. My name is Corey Redonnet, NS Design's Artist Relations Manager. We are joined by company founder and designer Ned Steinberger, NS Artists bassist Brittany Frompovich, who runs Rock for Strings program. And we also have Tim Campen of Reignite. We are joined also by Scott's student Nick Sortizio, a classical guitarist and cellist in the NCSSM Orchestra, who will be attending Duke University this coming fall. We're glad you're all here, and I'll let Scott take it away.
Well, it's really great to be here. It's always an honor to get to work with this fine group of people. And after the Connect event that we had back in January, I just got so excited about the prospects of these kinds of live streams and the work of my colleagues all around the country, really all around the world. And we started talking about some more content that could be helpful to teachers, particularly in this year of hybrid teaching and learning during the COVID-19 crisis. So many people had to pivot into different modes of content delivery for orchestra and rehearsal and just doing things from a distance. And so I was so fortunate to already be up and running with my NS Design instruments and with a lot of audio production stuff here at my home as both an artist and as a teacher, that it was easy for me to start thinking about how I could use these instruments in the very best way to offer musicianship and really important content to my students. And one of my long-standing beliefs is that, I'm going to take a quick drink of water here. One of my long-standing beliefs is that if something's working for me in the classroom, there's probably somebody out there that can use some of that information and put it to use as well. So really, this is all about sharing some successes and some things I've tried over the last year to help out students. So I'm really honored to be here tonight. I'm honored to get to talk to Ned and have my colleagues from around the country join us tonight too. So thanks to you guys, Brittany and Tim, for jumping in on this as well.
It's an honor to have you here, Scott. So thank you
Ned.
very much.
All right, well, let's jump in maybe to our first video. I believe this is using the electric violin to create cello parts. And
so let me set this up just a little bit for you all. This is a brand new video. This is a premiere tonight. I'm hoping that some of the folks that have tuned in have looked at some of the stuff that we premiered at the NS Connect event. I've been creating all year, I've been creating what I call audio guides. And those audio guides are effectively me playing all 5 parts of the string orchestra into a digital audio workstation and creating something that then I could disseminate to my students that we could use both in rehearsals through Zoom, because, you know, in Zoom, I can't conduct because of the delay, or we can't really play together with people in the room. We were a hybrid school, so I had half my class in the classroom for rehearsal and half the class out on Zoom. So if I tried to coordinate that, it would just cause all kinds of problems. So I started creating audio guides. I selected all my repertoire around a basic premise that I wanted to be able to use a click track. I wanted to be fairly metronomical in the music that we did, and that I could disseminate that audio guide to all my students, and we could use it as a centerpiece through Zoom for everybody to rehearse together. So part of that is I had to kind of know what the standard mistakes are in the repertoire by high school students, because I'm not getting oral feedback every day through every single class. So I was able to lean on a lot of experience as an orchestra conductor and sort of guessing where we might need to talk about an intonation issue or a rhythm issue or a bow direction issue or something like that. But these audio guides became pivotal to my classroom. So our first video that we premiered back at the NS Connect event really shares that. And now the videos we're going to show tonight kind of dig a little deeper in. And one of the first challenges that I had is that I'm not a very good cello player. I can get my way around a violin, I can get my way around a viola, and we'll talk about bass in a minute, but from a cello perspective, I would be doing a disservice to my students. Well, a couple of years ago, people who know me a little bit know that a lot of my life has been involved with a band called Believer, where I do these really thick string orchestra accompaniments to a thrashy metal band, and I've been doing this for over 30 years with Believer. So, and I've been seeking out the perfect cello tone with a violin for many years. A couple of years ago, when D'Addario Strings came out with their octave violin strings, I put them on one of my NS Design instruments, my 4-string CR. And it gives me a really nice facsimile of a cello. Now this goes down to a low G, an octave below a violin G. It doesn't go down to the C. So if my cello section is playing down on the C string, I have to take it up an octave. That might cause a little bit of an issue, but for the most part, I'm playing in the range of the cellos when I'm creating the audio guide with the CR. So that sets it up a little bit. Let's show the video and then we'll come back and talk a little bit. And I want to get Nick's impression of it since he's been using it all year long.
The real deal.
Yeah. Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Scott Laird. I'm the orchestra director at the North Carolina School of Science and Math, and we're going to give a little session today on achieving a cello sound with an electric violin. Over the years, I've been sort of chasing a good cello sound for a variety of reasons, all the way back to my work with Believer when I was scoring and recording orchestral sounds with a rock band, to this moment that we're in right now of hybrid teaching, where I'm creating audio guides for my students to play along to as we learn string orchestra repertoire. And so over the past couple of months while we've been doing this, I've really been thinking a lot about how to achieve a cello sound with an electric violin. So I want to walk you through some of that process and just give you a little bit of insight into my journey with it. So I've got a couple of different resources here. I've got a 4-string CR electric violin here, and I've got a 5-string CR violin as well. If I grab the 5-string right now, the 5-string goes down to a low C, and so if I am playing with it, it's just a standard. So the very first way that I would try to achieve the cello sound, years ago I had an effects processor that had an octave setting on it, and it would process that sound. I could play along with it. And so with this violin, one way that I can get that cello sound is to turn on an effects processor. I use actually an octave machine that's not even manufactured anymore, called a drop tune. But you can find an octave effect on and a pitch shifting effect on lots of different effects processors. I personally like the Digitech pitch shifters a lot, so you might check out Digitech as one possibility. So let me just play a little bit. So you can hear that you get that octave down. It's a little bit mechanical sounding to my ear, and one of my values here is I'm trying to get the most natural sound possible. Another function on most pitch shifters is that it will play your actual pitch and the octave down, which sounds like this. Now that to me sounds a little bit more natural because it has the little bit of that attack that comes with the transients in your playing. The upper harmonics get placed in there in a nicer way. So a lot of times if I'm using an effects processor like that, I will want to keep that octave sound in. So I'm hearing the actual pitch of my violin and the octave down. That's one way. Okay. Now another way to do it is to record in your actual pitch. And then after it's been recorded, you can then use the pitch shifting function in your digital audio workstation. I'm working in Pro Tools back here. And so I have one here that I did a pitch shift for. Let's just play that for you. I was working on Eine kleine Nachtmusik today. Now to me, it still gets that little bit of a mechanical sound. Now something I've found is if I process that after it's been performed in time with my click track, I have noticed that sometimes it pulls out of time a little bit. It's not real solid with the click track. Whereas if I perform it live with the effects processor, it is a much more in-time performance. One thing about the effects processor that I notice, if I'm using the octave only, like in this case, the string or the sound responds a little bit later than I play it. Oh, actually, I'm not there, am I? Yeah. Oh, there we go. You might notice that sound takes just a little bit of time to get out there. So I have to almost anticipate when I'm playing along to a click track. So that's part of the kind of the decision-making process. How can I get the most accurate performance possible? Now, a few years ago, my friends at the D'Addario company came up with a string called an octave string, which I have gone ahead and placed on my 4-string instrument. And now there are no effects on this instrument right now. And yet, to me, the octave string, it's a helicore string that's an octave down, actually gives me a great cello sound. And now I've got something that really sounds good when I mix it in with the rest of my string orchestra. So at this point, I have really gravitated 100% to the D'Addario octave strings on my CR 4-string violin. Now, there's a couple of drawbacks here. One of the drawbacks is that on a 5-string violin, I go down to an open C. And on the 4-string violin, I only go down to an open G. So now if I'm playing anything that's going to be on the C string on the cello, I have to transpose it up an octave. For me, I'm so used to doing that in the classroom when I'm playing along or demonstrating for cellos that it's really not that big of a problem. But it is another factor to consider. If the cello part's got a lot of stuff down there on that C string, you may want to use the 5-string violin with the effects processing to get that low C function. So in the end, when you're trying to play cello parts on electric violin, you really have 3 legitimate options. An effects processor with an octave function, either with only the lower octave or both actual pitch and the lower octave. Two options there. The second option is to record it in real time, in real pitch, in actual pitch on your violin. and use the built-in effects processor on your digital audio workstation to bump that pitch down later. Gets a little bit of a mechanical sound, and it might push it out of time a little bit. For my money, I don't like that option a whole lot. And then finally, the option that I have grown to use the most in these times is the D'Addario Helicore octave strings on my CR4 violin, and then I can play it in the pitch that the cello would actually play. To just give you a couple of kind of examples of what it sounds like all put together, I will come here and play for you the octave string, the one that I actually use in the mix. Let's give you that. Okay, now I'm going to take that out and I'll give you a feel for the effects. This is the one that was recorded in real pitch and then changed afterwards. A little too mechanical. Okay, and then finally the one where I use the effects processor, and let's give you just a little bit of that one. To me, that was a little bit late. And now if I go back to the one that I actually really like with the D'Addario octave strings. By itself. So there you have it. I hope that defines it a little bit, and I hope that gave you maybe some ideas of what you can do with recording with your NS Design electric violins, and maybe incorporate some of that into your teaching. For now, thanks again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in another one of these videos. Thanks.
Great. That was very interesting. Now, I guess that the C string for a cello, for a violin, is not available. Is that true for a 5-string?
So as you know, I talk to the folks at D'Addario pretty frequently, and they know I'm waiting on one. And I'm excited about extended range strings, Ned. I think
Don't do that. You're not the only one waiting. Okay.
Yeah, right. And then the question becomes, and it's a good question, because I obviously have NS viola as well. And then you start thinking, well, an octave set of viola strings might even give us a more realistic tone because it's a longer string, right? And you and I have talked a lot about harmonics and fundamentals with strings and what our brain does to pitch and complex tones, which for those of you out there, they're the best conversations in the world to talk to Ned about these kinds of things. But anyway, and Fantao and I talk about this stuff a lot at D'Addario as well. For those that don't know, Fan is the lead engineer for D'Addario Orchestral Strings, and these guys are brilliant when it comes to how sound works with electronics and with acoustic instruments. So yeah, Ned, I'm looking forward to a set of octave viola strings or more extended range violin strings to keep expanding what we can do with these in a digital audio workstation environment.
It's a challenge to make that low C string, that octave C. That's part of the reason you don't have it yet, is that it's an engineering challenge for sure.
Right.
One thing that I can share is that with electric instruments, taking if you took an acoustic violin and put an octave G string on it, nothing really would happen at all. I mean, you wouldn't really. But with electric instruments, it's a whole different ball game. And the thing that's interesting is that a short string is going to have more bass than a long string. And the reason that acoustic instruments have developed, basses have long strings and, pianos have super long bass strings is because people are looking for, to produce that with an acoustic soundboard and all, you need all this driving force that you don't need with an electric instrument. And in fact, a short fat string is going to have more bass than a long skinny string. So, more in relation to the harmonics. So there's a lot of opportunity to create bass instruments, electric bass instruments, which your violin now becomes a bass instrument, right?
Yeah.
With shorter strings, and it's musicians like you and many others who have the imagination to experiment with these kinds of new opportunities that are possible with electric instruments. Wow,
that's just mind-boggling, to be quite honest, and really interesting to me. Nick, I'm going to try and pull you in. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Ned.
One more thing, just to explain that just a little bit, because a thick string is not capable of producing the high harmonics that a skinny string is able to produce. So that's why an electric instrument has plenty of volume, and you have a low string and it's very big diameter. You lose the high harmonics but the bass still comes through. But the downside is that if you want to have a bass sound that has the higher harmonics combined with it so you can hear it in a group, that's where the limitations are. So that's why, for example, we have the double bass with the long string, because that gives you a larger harmonic, more harmonic content, not only the bass, but also all the higher harmonics. So just a little bit of what I know from my world that I do enjoy sharing. So, but go ahead, Nick. I'm sorry to.
Nick, I'm wondering from a sort of a student perspective and an artist perspective, and particularly because you're a cellist, how did it feel to you to work with those cello parts? Just anything you want to add to the conversation.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's very valuable. Of course, when we're in an orchestra setting, the cello, we're often acting as almost the rhythm section, or we sort of come in and out. And so we have to be very with it. I think it's one of the values of the click tracks as well. Something that we classical musicians don't always do super well is stay with the rhythm. We can pretend it's rubato, but sometimes we're just wrong. And so having that authentic sound as opposed to something like MIDI is very, very valuable, especially with something like the Mozart you were playing. I think especially Mozart or Haydn, something like that, can be very difficult for less experienced musicians if they don't understand the stylistic character. And that's something that you wouldn't get with something like MIDI, which is a very lightweight solution in a way that recording, an acoustic cello is not, right? Which is, of course, what we're doing for you. But it's very valuable because we do get that information, we get that detail in the recording, and it still comes through even when we're listening to all 5 parts of the orchestra put together. We can understand what's happening, even though the music's more metronomic, because it has to be, because we're not together. We can still get, what articulation is Mr. Laird using? What does he want for the particular characteristics of the different pieces? So in that way, it's very valuable.
Grasshopper, you have learned so well. I really appreciate that. It's like you're reading my mind in terms of my goals. Go ahead, Ned. Sorry.
I was interested that you have become Mr. Laird. I guess that's the world you live in. But
that's the world I live in.
With Scott, and so Nick, I give you permission, maybe incorrectly, to just call Scott by his right name.
I concur. Hey, Brittany and Tim, I'd love to get your thoughts. I don't know if you've been doing this or if you've used it at all, or any responses you guys have.
That's pretty cool. I had a violinist restring his violin to do viola tuning for something a few years back. But yeah, if I had this tool at the time, there would have been a lot more I would have had him do in the studio. It's pretty cool stuff, Scott.
Cool. Thanks, Brittany. Tim, anything?
Yeah, I've never heard an octave violin, so that was kind of cool to hear it. Yeah, I think I like the tone. I've talked with D'Addario about making a low B flat string for a cello. So I have an NS5 string with a low F, but I'm trying to go even lower.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to hear you, Ned, talk about the actual engineering, that goes into and the physics of it all. But yeah,
Well,
super interesting. I'm just curious how you kind of got into this idea of wanting to drop your violin down, mainly just to connect with the cellist then.
Yeah, so Tim, it does go to my history. I'll just give you like a real abridged um, version of it. But when I first started teaching, I had a couple of I had a guy who joined the orchestra. He was a guitar player, and his name is Kurt Bachman. He was a phenomenal guitarist, and his band Believer got signed while he was a senior in high school. And they asked me, and they were doing thrash music in the mid '80s, and they asked me if I would write something as an intro to their title track of their first record. And so I started arranging things, and in our first work with Believer, my first work with Believer, we used kind of to Nick's point, we used MIDI low tones, and I knew it wasn't doing exactly what I wanted. And as I grew with that group as a studio musician, I was chasing orchestral sounds. I was overdubbing a lot. I was an ADAT guy through the '90s, so I was chasing heavy orchestral sounds. And the problem was so much stuff was fast and chunking that if I was using any of these tools that put me even a little bit out of time, it didn't work, right? So I had to. So I've just been chasing real time, extended range violins for a long time, and the octave strings. Fortunately, I have a relationship with D'Addario, and when they first introduced them to me, it was I thought, could this really be a solution? I was a little skeptical, and I put them on the CR, and I actually don't ever take them off my CR. I use them all the time, and sometimes when I go to gigs, I take both an octave violin and a 5-string, and then sort of, depending on what's needed on the show, I'll use one or the other. If there's a lot of treble instruments on the show, I'll pull the octave violin out and I fill a different sonic space. Like if it's a rock show or an improvised show, I just sort of gauge it around what it is. And if it's a guitar heavy show, I play my 5-string. I play the real pitch.
Really cool. Yeah, when I was first getting into playing more bass lines and playing more Turtle Island string quartet arrangements, playing bass lines as a cellist, I actually started using that same octave pedal you have. I forget what it's called, the digital one, but I definitely noticed, latency, and then it sounds kind of digital. And so that's when I kind of got to get connected with NS, and introduced me to the low F string. But originally I just tuned my cello down a fifth, so I didn't have a top A string. So it's a little awkward asking for the orchestra to tune.
So you mentioned Turtle Island. Daryl Anger has been using something he calls a tenor violin for many years.
Right. Yeah.
Where he uses cello strings and violas. I don't know exactly what his configuration is, but I became aware of that a long time ago and sort of always had an intention to do it, and it wasn't very convenient. But when the folks at D'Addario, handed me a package of 4 strings, and it just was convenient and easy. It was easy to do. So, well, Corey, you want to jump to the next thing?
Sure. That sounds great. I think we're going to be doing some how to create upright bass tracks without an upright bass or a violin or a cello.
all right, I got to see this.
The bass man. Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Laird, and I'm the orchestra director at the North Carolina School of Science and Math. And I've been providing some videos on how I make guide tracks for my orchestra throughout the pandemic, and I'm probably going to continue doing it after the pandemic is over. So today I want to talk a little bit about getting bass lines recorded. Yeah, I've mentioned before that I love to use my NS Design electric violins to do all of the violin, viola, and cello tracks. And today I want to talk just a little bit about the NS Design radius bass that I use for the bass lines. So when I'm creating these guide tracks, I'm really playing all 5 voices of the string orchestra and stacking them together in a digital audio workstation. And I have found after a lot of experimentation that I really like doing the bass line with an electric bass guitar. The reason I do that, there are a number of reasons. First of all, I love being able to get just the right amount of tone control so that I can get the attack and articulation of the notes for the bass line. Now you might be thinking, well, if it's arco, it's not going to sound like the bass. And I get that, but I want to remind you that the guide track is really for reference for students to learn their part and then record their part on their own so that I can put them together in a digital audio workstation. By doing the bass line with a bass guitar, I am getting that articulation. The bass players are really hearing that clear articulation and able to play along with it. The rest of the orchestra is hearing that articulation very cleanly, and to my ear, it promotes really accurate rhythm. So that's an important facet of this. The second important facet is the fact that a bass guitar is fretted. It allows me to create a very accurate intonation under which I'm going to build everything else. Now I can play an upright bass, but in all honesty, it's not my instrument. I'm a violinist. And so when I play a bass guitar, I know by using a fretted instrument, I'm going to have very accurate intonation. I want to tell you with my electric instruments and for recording these guide tracks, I always tune my instrument with an electronic tuner. I do that with the bass as well. So before I even start the recording session, I make sure that all of my instruments have been tuned with an electronic tuner that I happen to have on my phone. Now I am using an NS Design radius bass. It's the wave radius. I like this bass for a lot of reasons. It has really great attacks or transients, so I love the bite to this sound. It also sustains very nicely, so when I play a note and I'm playing maybe a half note or a whole note and I want that sustain to last, the sustain really lasts nicely on this bass. It has great tone controls. I tend to leave the tone controls open the whole way, so I'm getting the whole frequency spectrum that allows me to hear the attacks really nicely, so that works really well. And it's just a really balanced, well set up, great sounding instrument. So I recommend this. If you don't have a NS Design radius bass for your school orchestra program or your middle school or high school, I strongly recommend this instrument. So today I've been working on a little grade 2.5 piece by Tom Sharp, one of my favorite arrangers and composers. It's called Just for Fun, and it's just got a nice little rhythm to it. It's sort of a little bit Latin and sounds really cool. So a very repetitive bass line, arco and pizzicato, but it just has this kind of nice So I'm going to play a little bit of the arrangement for you that I put together. I always record the bass line first, and then I go up from there. In this particular piece, the cello part very closely mirrors the bass part. So again, I don't think it really bothers my students. They hear the bass line on a bass guitar. They hear the cello part on, as I've talked about in other videos, on an electric violin with D'Addario octave strings, pushing it down the octave. So I also want to say this. I don't ever put reverb on the bass. If you're adding a little bit of reverb for the impression of a room, I think that's great to do with violins, the highest pitched instruments, a little bit less on viola, a little bit less on cello, and I leave the reverb off on the bass, and it really, again, promotes accuracy. So here's a little bit of Just for Fun by Tom Sharp. You'll hear the drum part that I created first, and then it gets into the bass line first along with cello. You'll notice there's very little reverb here. Second violin comes in with a little bit of reverb. Now first. Hoping that it translates on the video and you can hear the real crisp and articulate bass. But for me, articulation and accuracy of intonation, along with great tone quality with this instrument, it just really works well. I hope this helps out for you. Always record the bass first when you're doing guide tracks, no reverb. And by the way, I always pan the bass directly in the center. Good luck. I hope this helps out a little bit.
Nicely done, Scott. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Those are very key points, especially about panning and reverb, which we will get into a little bit later on this call. But it's great to hear that you're really going for the accuracy and giving the students a tool that I imagine a student playing to that is going to hear their bowing, hearing their arco, but having that pitch reference is probably so vital.
Tell you what, my bass section at the school this year is an interesting mix of I really had three bass players throughout the school year. I kind of a little different configuration per semester, but both semesters I had one bassist who was quite advanced and one bassist that sort of fits a little more in the pocket of a traditional high school bassist. You know what I mean? Probably hadn't studied privately a whole lot or anything like that. So the two, I felt that contrast between the two of them throughout the year on all the repertoire we did. And I got wonderful feedback from both of them for different reasons. You know, they both were able to give me really nice recordings that I was able to put together in the workstation afterwards. I will say, if anybody's interested, you can hear the final product of all of these tracks on the NCSSM Fine Arts YouTube page. You can hear a ton of virtual ensembles from our year. And Corey, I can send you some links to these specific tunes if you like afterwards. Brittany, I'm curious. I think I remember that you're a bassist. Any reaction to any of that, or anything you'd like to add to anything?
I thought it was great. You put in tips on how to mix it. That was a nice touch. Center pan, no reverb. Points for me on it. No, I kind of smiled because I do a lot of electric bass playing, all of my upright players as well, just to teach them to hear. So I don't think it's a bad tool to have in the arsenal. It teaches them to hear. It helps them with their intonation. I use MuseScore files too that are available. They can download, but they are MIDI generated, so that's the downside. But yeah, that's some good stuff. That's some good stuff you're doing.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Nick, did you ever kind of how much did you notice the bass in your work with the guide tracks?
Especially on Just for Fun, the piece that you played, it was pretty noticeable because obviously it has a plucked attack. I mean, you can just sort of tell. Especially when you play it right next to the cello, you can sort of hear the slight difference in the way they go. But I mean, I think in that way it was actually a little bit more helpful in some ways. Obviously I'm more used to plucked instruments, and so I'm more used to sort of that mode of thinking about things. I thought the tips about panning and things like that were very interesting to me. Obviously, I come from a guitar background where we're playing, if we're playing a Baroque trio, we're playing all four sort of parts at the same time. So it's interesting to hear like how you mix those. Especially because if we're live, we're all panned based on where we're sitting, but you have a lot more control. So I thought that was very interesting.
Well, you sort of set us up for the next videos because we would talk about that in the next two videos because I will tell you that I think both panning and room in the production they're vital to having a sort of a natural relationship with the music. When in audio production, when everything is pan dead center, it's very confusing. Your brain just really has trouble sorting mono out because it's not natural. So I don't know. I'm sort of being conscious of time. I know we only have a little bit of time. Shall we go on to the next? Thank you, both Brittany and Nick. Shall we go on to the next video? Oh,
Yeah.
but I can't neglect Ned. I want to know what Ned thinks about it. You're muted, Ned.
You're supposed to be able to hit your space key and be unmuted, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, in my case. So it wasn't working. In any event, I find the whole thing fascinating, and I think you're right that we are short on time, so I don't really have enough to add to that to delay the rest of the event. So
all right,
I'm all ears.
Let's go to the next video. Hi, my name is Scott Laird from the North Carolina School of Science and Math, and tonight I want to talk a little bit about applying reverb to your audio guides for your students to create virtual orchestra performances. Now, when I'm creating an audio guide, I like to put some reverb on my instruments to give them the sound of being in a room, in a hall. So the first thing you have to do is select a reverb that makes sense. For my money, when I'm selecting a reverb for an orchestra performance or an orchestra audio guide, I typically go to the presets for a small hall. I don't want a large hall reverb because I think they sometimes sound a little unusual to me. A small hall gets kind of the idea that I'm seeking. That's number one. Another principle of applying reverb is getting the right mix. Now, just about every reverb processor has a mix function on it. And that mix is really the mix of the dry signal to the affected signal. So if you use a 100% mix on the affected signal, what you end up getting is something that sounds really too wet and kind of indiscernible. It's not really what you want. So I typically start at about 50-50 on the mix, and then I work from there to get a really natural sound. The idea is that when you're in a hall, when you hear the sound of an instrument, you're hearing some of the sound of the instrument directly, that's the dry sound, and you're hearing some of the sound of the instrument kind of reverbing around the hall. That's the reverberated sound. And we're trying to find kind of that mix between those two that you would hear when you're listening to the orchestra. If you're conducting the orchestra, you're used to hearing more of the direct sound, so the mix then would be quite low. But if you're sitting out in the hall, you hear more of the reverberant sound, and so the mix changes. So again, I would start around 50%, about a 50-50 mix, and then work from there. It's very common for folks that are new to recorded sound to put too much reverb in their mix. So be careful that you don't sort of signal, if you're a novice at this, you don't want to signal that you're a novice by putting too much reverb. So definitely be careful of that. And try to kind of use your memory to make the reverb sound the way you want. Now, in all of the guides that I've been talking about, I really have a single track for each voice in the string orchestra. Violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, and bass. Now, the principle of applying reverb that I like to use is that higher pitches take up less space in the mix so they can handle more reverb. So I tend to put more reverb on the violins, and I put no reverb at all on the bass, and then I sort of graduate the reverb through the viola and the cello section. So I put the most reverb on the first and second violins, a little less on the viola, a little less on the cello, and I don't put any reverb at all on the bass. If you put reverb on the bass, it's going to get really quite muddy, and things become a little indiscernible. Same with the cello. You just don't want to put too much reverb on those lower pitched instruments. So the principle that I adhere to is low pitches, less reverb, or even no reverb on the bass, and put your reverb on the higher instruments, and you'll get a really pleasing sound that I think you'll be happy with, and that your students can hear exactly what you're going for. And by the way, when you're mixing your student projects, I recommend the same thing. Apply more reverb to the violins than you do. I wouldn't apply any reverb to the bass and just a very little bit to the cello. And I think you'll find that your results are really quite good. Good luck with this. I hope it works out well for you, and we'll see you the next time. A lot of those ideas come directly. Thanks. A lot of those ideas come directly from a book called The Art of Mixing that I used a lot. Corey, do you know that book? I used that handbook a lot when I first started in audio production, and there's even a good 2-hour YouTube video based on that book that you can learn a lot about mixing and applying effects and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thank God for the YouTube resources, right?
It's just unbelievable. I'm often aware that the opportunities that students like Nick and my boys who are musicians have to learn production and audio principles are just so great compared to what we had when we were the same age. So tools as well, you know, it's just a phenomenal thing.
Certainly. And
Tim, I saw you jumped in. Any reaction?
Well, I just switched my video back on, but yeah, I agree with everything you're saying.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd love to just share some tunes with you for sure with my own electric string quartet project, for sure. But
tell us
yeah,
more about that project, Tim.
Yeah. So it's symphonic film is kind of what I'm calling it. So I compose like 3 movements of a symphony when we're playing with orchestral tracks, and all that synced to a motion picture that I'm putting out this fall. But it's with 2 electric violinists, me playing bass, cello, and a drummer. So it's called a percussive string quartet. So we do a lot of chopping and strumboing and contemporary techniques for sure, but that's called Reignite. But yeah, a lot of that stuff I've kind of had to learn on my own, you know, as far as mixing goes, but also Nashville, Tennessee is my home, so there's just a ton of engineers to pick their brains and stuff. But yeah, love what you had to say in that video for sure.
Cool, thanks, Tim.
yeah, I think it's really important to hear how you apply those things, or you apply the reverb, and how much of an effect it can have. And especially if you're using these as teaching tools, that you don't saturate it and make it really muddy and discernible. So it's really the clarity that's important.
Something I neglected to mention, I think I mentioned in the video we didn't watch today, the first one, is that I do everything direct. I mean, I'm not miking these instruments for this. I'm plugging them directly into the digital audio workstation. So it is a dry, extraordinarily present sound going into the workstation. And if I didn't apply a little bit of reverb, I think it could also become I don't know if confusing is the right word, but it's a little unnatural. My goal for my students is that they don't have to think about it much. I don't even, and I'd be curious of Nick's response to this. I'm not sure they all knew I was doing this on electric instruments. I probably told them that at some point, but I'm wondering how conscious you are of the fact that the audio guides are electric instruments. Nick, can you speak to that at all?
I mean, I knew they were electric instruments because I know that you've talked a lot about the electric instruments, you know, and I can tell they're not MIDI. So, I mean, that was what made sense. I mean, they're also definitely not acoustic. So, you know, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. I think, you know, it's interesting, you know, when we're recording the dorm rooms, which is where I generally did the recording, they have cinder block walls and sort of linoleum floor. So it's a very not dry space. So that was an interesting challenge because we are recording acoustic to get, you know, a more pure instrument sound because it can very quickly just fill up, even just listening live. But I think that's it's very interesting that you are able to sort of articulate explicitly what's happening, because I think a lot of music, especially with either younger people or people who aren't familiar with music, is helping them figure out why it sounds weird. You know, you can identify that there's something off, but being able to actually pinpoint what it is and how to fix it is I think 90% of the battle. So that was very interesting.
Has anybody messed around? Sometimes I overdub an acoustic on top of my electric, and I've had a little bit of luck with kind of getting like a mix between the two, but I don't know, Scott, if you ever mess around with that. Or...
You know, I lost for a second. Sorry about that. Could you say that again?
Yeah, no problem. Just sometimes I overdub an acoustic on top of my electric, and I find that kind of helps give kind of the mic sound that you miss, but also the full presence of the DI. I'm just curious if you ever do that with your stuff. Or...
Yeah, you know, I haven't done that very much, especially with these audio guides, because they're not really for performance. They're a reference. Somebody, Brittany, do you remember when we did the panel discussion at NS Connect? Someone said they even mic their NS instrument.
Yeah, that was a big topic.
Yeah, I haven't tried it yet. I just haven't had time. But I really intend to do that. They said just throwing, even when they're recording direct, they throw a microphone on the CR, and it gives them a different kind of level of, I guess it was presence and articulation. It was a great concept. I haven't tried it yet.
Yeah, we were even getting that from cellos too. So.
There are many players out there who are doing that. It's and they rave about it, how they can get such a depth of sound because they have the sound that's from the pickup, and then they just the strings are have a different kind of those are the natural strings, and there's no soundboard. You know, you're hearing the string when you put that mic right close to the strings on an electric solid body instrument. You're hearing the strings, which are very, very low level, but have a certain kind of purity and clarity to them. I've told this story before, but I have a very good friend who's a violinist and plays acoustic and electric. And one night we were hanging out, and I had a little Chopin going in the background, and just the piano, and we picked up his electric violin with no amplification. Again, the music was coming very quietly, and we were in a rural environment. It was very quiet. And I was struck by how beautiful the sound of the string is. It was really just that string. Listen carefully. But so with a mic, you can add that into the mix, and people do that with a lot of enthusiasm, and they get a great result. So it's just another angle on it. Obviously not practical for a live performance, but for recording, it's a possibility.
Great. And Tim, I will try that. I will try doubling my acoustic on it. That's, again, just not something that I've fooled around with, but I will, with your recommendation, I'll definitely give that a go.
Yeah, I mean, it's mainly if you're recording something that you're trying to put out, if they're instructional videos, I understand you wouldn't necessarily need to do that, but I think, yeah, even the electric, like miking it, you're just getting that bow kind of airy sound that the mic picks up that you kind of miss out, when you're just going DI. I know some people like Samuel Brock's violinist that's in my project, and he created impulse responses of the space by miking an electric, and he's had luck like getting it to sound like an acoustic violin more so with that impulse response. So, which that blows my mind away that technology exists.
Yeah. Very cool.
Very good. Well, shall we move on to talking about panning?
Cool. Corey, do we have time for the video? I don't remember how long this one is.
Yeah.
Let's
this
do
is
it.
pretty short, so yeah, we can.
Hi, I'm Scott Laird from the North Carolina School of Science and Math, and in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about panning for your audio guides and for your student performances. So a lot of folks that are new to the mixing process forget completely about the concept of panning. But panning is really important in your final product for a virtual ensemble performance. So let's just talk about panning and what it means and how we can use it. First of all, when we're dealing in a virtual performance, we're dealing in stereo sound. So the way I love to teach students about stereo is that the left speaker is supposed to relate to your left ear, and the right speaker is relating to your right ear. So the thing that comes out of that speaker is what we would hear in those ears. So we have the option in all digital audio workstations to pan voices to different places in that spectrum of stereo sound. So we could have something all the way on our left, we could have it all the way on our right, or we could have it dead center, and really frankly anywhere in between. So by panning the voices of your audio guide or of your orchestra, it makes that single voice significantly more discernible and separated from the mishmash of stuff that we have. So like in my orchestra, when I do the student performances, there might be 15 to 20 first violin tracks, and I pan them all to the same place. So it's just not a jumble of sound. And I think you'll find you have a lot of success if you do that. So let me tell you what I do. I take the first violin section or individual track on the audio guide and I pan it hard to the left, all the way to the left, as far as it'll go. Just basically where the first violins would be as if I were conducting the orchestra. Then I take the second violin section and I pan them hard to the right, kind of where the cellos would be in a traditional orchestra conducting situation. You might wonder, well, why do I put the second violins there instead of the cellos? Well, I like the highest pitched instruments to be on opposite sides in this situation, because so frequently in our string orchestra parts, they're playing either responsive parts or they're playing harmony with each other. And I really like having those high pitches to the extreme sides. Then I always leave the bass section dead center. It is kind of a standard principle or practice in audio mixing that the lowest pitched instruments, not always, but frequently, are dead center, and I like to do that. You hear that in a rock setting a lot of times. The kick drum will be dead center, the bass guitar will be dead center. So for me, I like the basses or the lowest pitches to be dead center. Then I typically take the viola section and I put them right around 10 o'clock on the clock, and I put the cello section right around 2 o'clock. So when I hear my final product of my audio guide or my final product of my student virtual ensemble, I hear first violins here, violas here, basses here, cello here, and second violins over here. And I can pick those voices up very clearly. And I think you'll find with your student virtual performances that your audience will really appreciate that you took time to think about panning and to separate those voices out into a really manageable, aurally manageable setting. I hope this works out really well for you, and we'll see you the next time. So there you have it. Yeah, just, you know, it's absolute key to non-confusion. It allows you to really hear everything in its own way, and so many people don't understand it or don't know to do it. You know, just forget.
So logical, really.
Yeah,
even I can understand it. That's.
I'm always interested how people do it if they do it the way they would if they were from the perspective of the player or the perspective of the audience. And I'm always interested in that with rock bands. When you hear a drum fill, are they going left to right or right to left, depending on the perspective?
Yeah, that's definitely a big point for sure. I know my drummer always prefers mixing things the way that he sees them, but the audience, sees them the other way. So
I think it's also important to maybe mention, or I'm curious how you create these, not only with the guide tracks, but your students' orchestra, virtual orchestra, using submixes and how reverb is affected, like in a group mix setting, and how panning is done that way, because we have the easy technology to do that in all these DAWs. So how do you do it?
So I might be a little rudimentary, to be honest with you. I just finished up. Nick was part of a huge project, a symphonic suite that we did the world premiere for this just last week at our virtual orchestra listening celebration. It was written by a former student of mine named Chad Smith, who is a woodwind doubler in the Broadway musical Wicked. He was my student back in the 80s when he was in middle school. And he's also very well known in the recording world as a top quality woodwind doubler. I ran into him. I went to see Wicked last spring before the pandemic started. I ran into him, and he was thanking me over the summer, and he wrote this piece, and he said, "This is for your orchestra." So just recently, I mixed a full orchestra version with, I'd say, about 60 string tracks on it and a full winds section. So another, 30, 35 tracks of winds. And I didn't do a lot with bussing, but what I did do a lot with was I mixed the string section alone and got exactly what I wanted there. No reverb, but panned. Then I mixed the wind and percussion section alone, no reverb, but panned. Then I basically exported the two, and then later went in and superimposed them, because it was just too much in a single file for me to keep track of, to be quite honest with you. I mean, again, I'm a professional educator. I'm not a professional engineer, right? So for me, my submixes were strings panned, winds panned, no reverb, and then I put them together, balanced them out, got them where I wanted them, throw the reverb in, and it created an unbelievable impact. So if people go to that NCSSM Fine Arts YouTube page, look for Symphonic Suite in F, and that would be the final product that we did there. So Corey, I'm not sure that was exactly what you were thinking of when you talked about submixes, but that's how I approached it.
That's one submix that can be done. But yeah, I was usually groups, like group mixes where you might do all the violins together, and then all the cello and basses.
Yeah, and I quite frankly didn't get into that a lot. I could have and thrown the bussing in, but that's not even kind of where I take it for whatever my area of expertise is in Pro Tools. I know I still have a few places to go. By the way, I spend a lot of time in YouTube and Pro Tools too. I'm like, how do I do that? Go to YouTube, find a tutorial, come back and do it. Because I think it's a great point though that us pedagogues, us teachers that are used to producing orchestra concerts aren't, a lot of us, and myself included, this isn't what I do every single day. So to pick up a little bit each time that I do these, I think has been a really informative process for sure. And it's been fun to watch my students do it too. I encouraged students to do what we call self-ensembles, where I gave them a whole lot of Bach two-part inventions or trios, and have them learn to do simple self-ensembles where they record all three parts or all two parts, or maybe do the first violin part 4 times and the second violin part 4 times and the third violin part 4 times. And we got some really cool, projects of kids just going for it and trying to learn how to use a digital audio workstation, because I think one reason was they were seeing me do it, and could kind of go for it without stress.
Yeah.
I think is that fair? Is that pretty?
Yeah, that's been a lot this last year too, and has been an ongoing discussion with this Connect series, is that a lot of educators who would not be getting into engineering or audio engineering or producing have been forced into this role. And I think it's fantastic, especially with the electric violins or electric stringed instruments, of course. And also getting some of those emerging styles that are not maybe your traditional orchestra, but like in the bass video you had talked about, the Latin inspired piece you were doing. And it's just great to hear all these educators and even private teachers maybe getting out of their comfort zone and learning a whole new set of skills. And it's
Corey,
wonderful to see.
I will just share with you over at ASTA, where most of you know, I spend a lot of time in a leadership role with ASTA on their national board right now. And the hot topic is underrepresented composers getting those opportunities to learn how to perform different styles, multi-styles, not just Viennese classical music, not just romantic music, not just Baroque music, but how can we as educators learn how to teach those styles appropriately, and how can we know more about what's out there so that we can introduce our students to those styles? Something I did this year, and Nick, you might want to say a word about this, but I started something called a composer spotlight, where every Tuesday night we had another composer of some underrepresented group of composers. So whether it was people of color, Latinx composers, female composers, Asian composers, but not your standard, again, Baroque, Viennese, classical composers, people that, and contemporary composers that my students might not have heard of before. And I didn't even couch it in that way that I was looking to feature underrepresented composers. They were just the composers I featured. And the response that I got from students was really moving, because kids can see themselves in these folks. And it's what I want to be as an educator, is somebody that's teaching to the whole child, and somebody that's representing the whole music industry, not just the narrow, down the middle classical styles. And look, electric violins are a big part of that for me. Although I also am the guy that'll say, look, if you have an electric violin, you can play Von Williams on the electric violin, or you can play Bach on the electric violin. And I think I'm demonstrating that with these audio guides in a real way also.
Great. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's pretty neat just to see, like a 16-year-old can just, put some tunes out on Spotify or wherever, and then, get famous or get recognition just from doing that now, just because of what technology has allowed us to do now. It's such like a blessing to be able to do that so easily, and that's great that you're educating your students that it's possible to so easily record your instruments.
I have a student, I won't use her name here, but she had taken my recording production class last year, and was in our guitar curriculum this year. And she took that skill, her incredibly high violin skills, and the skills on guitar that she developed this year, and produced 2 incredible songs, cover songs, but man, set up for some really, I think, amazing work as she goes on to college and has this opportunity to just be a creative musician. And that's a big part of what I want to see from my students. And I mean, I think the key is I sort of have a little mantra that to just find a way to say yes. I don't want to be the no guy. I want to be the yes guy. So whether it's Nick, who needed to make some really high level videos for his college auditions and guitar competitions, we found a way to get him some HD videos and great audio quality and like real legitimate studio time, to someone who's producing more like pop oriented music, or giving students opportunities to do these self ensembles with theirs. So I believe in it, and I sure try to say yes all the time.
Well, I think that's a wonderful thing. Just say yes. That's my new mantra. I hadn't thought of that before, but it's kind of loaded with all the other stuff that went just say no, obviously, but it's a great contrast. So good for you and all the work you're doing on behalf of your students. Really, it's to be applauded. So much heart and soul into education. It's really inspiring for me, and that the electric instruments can be part of that is great. But on the other hand, I think they are part of what music is all about, and they don't replace acoustic instruments. They're just a way to take another step and to live life more fully. So it's great to be a part of the whole musical scene and to have a role to play there. When I started out making electric violins, the electric violin was kind of a no-no. It was a bad thing for a lot of people, and times have changed a lot, and it's so wonderful to see that people can see that it's all part of a continuum, and it all works together. So thank you for for all you do, Scott. Really fantastic.
Ned, I just take this opportunity to thank you as well, because all of the innovation that you have initiated and provided for those of us that are trying to do something different and unique and creative. I mean, it's really an honor to have my name and my reputation attached to yours, and I've appreciated it for a long time, and I really appreciate you and the thoughtful nature with which you approach all of this stuff. So thank you so very much too.
Awesome. Thank you. Actually, that's very much appreciated. And that's it's all about making. It's just about they're tools. They're tools for you guys. So I learned so much just sharing a little time together, and so we will all go our ways and do what we do, and it comes together. That's fantastic. So
well, thank you all very much, especially thanks to Scott. And
I want to say special thanks. Yeah, I wanted to thank Nick. I really appreciate him on what really is his last day of high school for jumping in and being part of this wonderful conversation. And he, is a great representative of his peers at our school. They are just magnificent kids. I'm so honored to teach there every day, and it's been an honor to have him for 2 years. He has big things ahead of him, so keep an eye on Nick Sotizio as a name in the music world. And thanks. Yeah. And Brittany and Tim, same. Thanks. It means a lot that you guys were here today.
Thank you, Brittany, and thanks Tim for joining us. And
definitely. Yeah. Is there any way, Corey, you could ring us in an email or something so we could all stay connected, maybe?
Absolutely. I'll send a nice thank you out to y'all, and you can all be connected, which is what this
Thanks for bringing me in. Really appreciate it, Corey. Good to see you.
Thank you, Tim, for jumping in at the last minute. And Nick, best of luck next year at Duke. Or is it Duke?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, good. Sorry. And thank you all. Have a great evening. And Scott, thank you so much. This is really good information and great useful tools and assets.
Thank you.